Omniscient Reader is one of the best webtoon series I've read. A fun, action-packed series with fantastic characters and the best use of the reverse isekai premise I've seen. However, one of the best things about this series is the separation between reality and fantasy. Omniscient Reader follows the loner down on his luck Doksha Kim. Good old Doksha Kim doesn't have the best luck in the world. He's a temporary contract worker with a pretty tragic family life, and really only has one thing going for him: a serialized web novel known as 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. We start at the end, not of the series, though technically like episode 0 is the start, and we start at the end, not of the webtoon but of the novel, and with the simple line, "There are 3 ways to survive the apocalypse. Everything is fading and becoming unclear now. But one thing is certain. If you're reading this, you will survive." With just those lines, and a few minutes later, the world goes absolutely wild, as the world of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse becomes the new world, the reverse isekai, i.e. when a fantasy world gets copy and pasted onto a normal everyday one. Very fun, a lot of series involving dungeoning, rags to riches, F to S rank, hunters, skills, monster stats, and the other 80,000 tropes that these series have. I can think of like 10 of these series, but Omniscient Reader is one of my favorites of these, because Omniscient Reader handles all of these tropes and somehow also none of them. Omniscient Reader feels like a story about tropes, not a story with tropes. Anyways, with the world changing into Doksha Kim's favorite series, Doksha Kim has a major advantage going into this. He's been reading this series forever now. While he was getting bullied in school, he was reading this series. When he failed his college entrance exam, he was reading this series. When he was stationed in the front lines during military service, he was reading this series. Doksha Kim knows this story front to back. He practically knows all 3,000 plus episodes. This story, these characters, have gotten him through his own life. And now it's the story that's going to keep him and his friends alive. Not only does he have knowledge about the future and basically everything about this new world, but because he read so much of the story, he's been granted special abilities by a magical system that kind of also inserted itself into the world. These abilities, known as personal attributes, are kind of an insight onto the character. From landowner to circus performer to soldier who turned a blind eye to injustice, yes, those are all real personal attributes, they all tell a story about what this character is, who they were before and who they are now. Now, what Doksha Kim's personal attribute is still kind of a little bit of a mystery, but all of his skills tie back into his reading. Character profile, fourth wall, bookmark, Omniscient Reader viewpoints. Hey, that's the name of the series. Anyways, the biggest reason I wanted to take a closer look at this was because of his ability, Fourth Wall. A big part of this series is the whole reverse isekai thing. The idea that this web novel became the real world, that these fictional characters, this fictional world, the fictional systems, abilities, constellations, dokubai, all of the fictional stuff became reality. Now, to most people, this isn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem for them is that there are actual monsters and real-life quests and weapons and stats and gods, and that they have to fight for their life to get coins and abilities to fight against said monsters that come from other dimensions or go into other dimensions themselves. Most people have other things going on. Not to mention, most people haven't even read this series. In fact, most of the readership drops off around the 50 chapter mark. But that brings us to the only person who's read all of the series, Doksha Kim. Like I said, he knows this story better than anyone else in the world. And because of that, he has difficulty separating reality and fantasy. And there's no better indicator of this than his abilities. Doksha Kim's abilities basically derive from the world's being fiction. These abilities, like character profile, Omniscient Reader viewpoint, or bookmark, are mainly about realizing that they practically live in a book. Character profile, i.e. the idea that a character can be summarized in a quick profile, or how readers have an omniscient viewpoint, or the ability to see the entire story from an outsider's perspective, or like a narrator. Or bookmark, bookmarking. You bookmark things. We get it. But to me, it's a fourth wall that's the most interesting. Now, I think all of his abilities are actually really cool, but most of his abilities are pretty one-sided. Omniscient Reader Viewpoint is a little complicated, but it lets him read people's intentions, minds, and eventually their action. Character Profile just lets him see people's abilities and such. And Bookmark lets him borrow people's abilities and skills. They're actually really cool abilities, and they line up with the idea of being a reader. Not to mention, they only really seem to work with characters that the system deems as characters. People in Dr. Kim's real life aren't affected by these abilities. And I think it also lines up a lot with his personality and his way of thinking. However, it's the last ability, Fourth Wall, that to me is the most interesting quote-unquote overpowered ability that I've ever seen. Fourth Wall is, at first, just a protective ability. Not really an ability he activates, but a passive one. It blocks mental attacks, it dampens pain, it shortens effects, it calms him down. It's like the coolest and best defense ever. At least it is at first. The fourth wall in media itself is a pretty common concept. The fourth wall was a theatrical thing at first. The idea that there's this invisible barrier between the audience and the actors. It's later been adapted into other forms of content, from movies, TV shows, webtoon series, even web novels. The fourth wall is the screen, that we will be separated from not just the actors, but the content, the story, the characters, the world that we read and watch. There are a lot of series that break this barrier, that concept of breaking the fourth wall. Most series use this meta-ness for some good old humor. Think Deadpool, or to a lesser extent, Spider-Man. Other series use it for more meta commentary, like Doki Doki Literature Club, Undertale, and to a much lesser extent, the final chapters of The Boxer. But it's interesting, as Omniscient Reader is technically breaking the fourth wall, but not the fourth wall between us and the story, but the fourth wall between Doksha Kim and 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. Like I said, the fourth wall, not the barrier, but his actual ability, is an amazing defensive ability. In most circumstances. It blocks mental attacks, it dampens pain, yada yada yada. But there are a couple moments where it clearly states the fourth wall is shaking. It's happened quite a few times, and at first it always confused me a bit. The fourth wall is shown to be incredibly powerful. Not only blocking powerful skills like Jeonhyuk Yu's SS grade ability Eye of Sage with relative ease, but it also helping Doksha Kim survive in the stomach of a giant sea serpent, even seems to block the Dokkaebi, the literal system managers of the world. The fourth wall blocks a lot with relative ease, but there are some moments where the fourth wall is shaking, or something along those lines. Something is happening to the fourth wall. One of the first moments this appears is during a battle with Jeonhyuk Yu and Doksha Kim, when Jeonhyuk Yu is being possessed by the Cinema Master. It's a long story. The battle when Doksha Kim is reading his mind, Jeonhyuk Yu is thinking about how fruitless his life has been, how everything will simply reset when he dies, that he has no one he can depend on, that he's alone in this world. And this really sets Doksha Kim off, in honestly one of my favorite moments in the series, where he starts to get emotional, because it was Jeonhyuk Yu's lives that got him through his own life. Eventually the fourth wall starts to resonate, to invoke or suggest images, memories, and emotions. Why would a defensive ability do this? Why would a shield resonate with Doksha Kim's past, with his life, and with his emotions? We also see in the next chapter, when Jeonhyuk Yu breaks free from his possession and starts to question who Doksha Kim is, we get the fourth wall is being shaken due to excessive immersion. Shaken is something we get a lot throughout the series, and we can shake it up to the pure action of this moment, as here Doksha Kim is blocking an attack from probably one of the strongest humans on Earth, but we know there's more to that. And luckily for us, there are 2 other moments where the fourth wall is shaking in a noticeable way. And it's all because of this guy, or wolf guy. This werewolf used to be a human. Actually, he used to be Doksha Kim's bully. Someone who used to tease him for reading, and his mom. I'll get to her soon. And in this battle, the fourth wall does next to nothing but shake. Doksha Kim is way stronger, and the werewolf has nothing on Jeonhyuk Yu, but the fourth wall shakes so much because this werewolf isn't just some monster, but a part of Doksha Kim's life, a part of his reality. Not a part of the fantasy or the magic of the world, but a part of his life. And the same can be said about his mother. And yes, you know it's bad when you put someone's childhood bully in the same sentence as their mother. Dr. Kim had a pretty bad childhood growing up. His father was a gambler and abusive, and one day his mother mustered up enough courage to kill his father, going to jail and writing a book about the murderer. A book that did numbers, by the way. It was apparently one of Korea's best-selling books. Dr. Kim was bullied because of it. He was called a son of a murderer, but more importantly, he hated having his life story sold away. His mother isn't exactly a great person herself either, as we see with just a couple of words that the fourth wall shakes violently. Not a bit, violently. While writing the script, it dawned on me on how genius this ability's name is. The fourth wall is an invisible barrier that separates real life and fiction. It separates reality and fantasy. Just like how Dokshi Kim's fourth wall is an invisible barrier that separates reality and fantasy. Fantasy is on one side, the things he views as fantasy, as fake, as just a part of the book or a web novel on the other side of his shield. That's why when he takes damage from giant sea serpents, other monsters, or characters, it's dampened. It's why mental attacks are blocked. But his shield is only good when the danger is on the other side. Fourth wall is all about blocking or lessening the damage from fictional or fantasy things, or what Dokshi Kim views as fictional or fantasy things. But what he views as reality, what he defines as reality, basically puts that thing on the other side of the invisible barrier, on the other side of the shield. And instead of protecting Dokshi Kim from it, it sometimes amplifies it, as the fourth wall shakes when his reality and his fantasy start to cross over. When his bully comes back as a werewolf to fight him, when his mother is just honestly being his mom, even when someone lightly holds his hands, the fourth wall lightly shakes. Even more so when Jun-Yuk Yu acknowledges that Dokshi Kim is a part of his life, the fourth wall shakes due to excessive immersion in the fantasy that he's in. Looking back at this series, it's such a cool, not to mention smart way to go about this. Look, Omniscient Reader is about a lot of things, and a lot of things I don't fully understand yet, but something I've always really loved is how they've handled the separation of reality and fantasy. And that Dokshi Kim survives because he knows his fantasy, but the biggest threat to him is often reality. I think the series does an amazing job of making Dokshi Kim incredibly strong, yet also weak in the best way possible. So please, make sure to check out Omniscient Reader, updating every week on Webtoon.